Hey, what's happening? We're back. It is Sunday night AstroLive, and I'm your astro guide, Robert Phoenix. Yeah, well, getting a little bit of a late start tonight because we had some company over here on the 40. Well, it's not really 40, is it? It's more like, I don't know, an eighth, maybe an eighth. Anyway, Axel the History Kid and the A team stopped by for a little bit of football and watch my 49ers take a dirt nap tonight. Isn't that right, Peaches? Look who's here. Oh, she's been waiting for this moment. She's been waiting for this moment. That's right. She's been working on all of her calculations. And she's got some major predictions tonight. How is everybody? How are we? We're getting ready to get into some Scorpio energy, aren't we? If I'm not mistaken, it's Kamala Harris's birthday. It's her birthday. That's right. She's, I believe, 28 Libra, right? Or maybe she's 27 Libra. Let me go back. Let me check Harris's chart. I should know it by heart now. I put this thing up a number of times already. Where is it? Kamala Harris. You have to admire her chutzpah in a lot of ways. I mean, this is really somebody who is dedicated is not quite the word I would use. I would say she is absolutely fixated on becoming president of the United States. Did I get rid of her chart? I hope not. Absolutely fixated on becoming president of the United States. It's beyond dedicated or committed. It's almost like she's got these pit bull teeth and she's sunk them into the presidential race. There's her chart. You know, and once they got her into the interview mode, which was not really a great idea, but they had no choice. And she got knocked down and she gets back up. She gets knocked down, she gets back up. And I'm sure she has some medication along the way. So today was her birthday, the 20th of October. Should we do a little refresher? Shall we do a little refresher of the Kamal's chart? Why don't we? Why don't we? Let's see, bring it up here. Hold on. By the way, since it's Sunday night, I'll stop in on chat a bit and we'll do a little meet and greet for everybody. Let me let's do a little share screen. A little share screen. Share screen number one. Screen number one shared. There we go. Actually, because we're in a leap year, the degree days are off. So normally today would be the 27th degree. But because we're in a leap year, it's actually the 28th degree. There's one extra day this year. So technically, by degree, yesterday was her birthday. But today is officially her birthday. And I really do think she had the benefit of Mercury and Scorpio when she was on that Fox interview with Brett Baer. You know, when you look at the position of the sun in her chart, and the excuse me, the position of Mercury just a couple days ago. It's probably her peak. Like this is kind of like peak Harris right now. Maybe what in 2 days, 3 days, where the Sun conjunction Mercury, but this is really peak Harris. Like it doesn't get much better for her than the last couple days. So keep that in mind. I mean, think about that because today she's got the solar return, including from yesterday. And it's also trining Saturn. So, if there's going to be a moment in time where she's going to appear to have more gravitas to the world, it's going to be over the last few days. So getting her on the 60 Minutes, not the 60 Minutes, but the Fox News interview was probably pretty smart from an astrological perspective. Somebody did say that they had somebody on the Harris campaign working with astrology. I've heard that. And that would make sense. That she would time these interviews as they were coming in, right? Like the interviews are coming in as her son. They all happened basically starting the previous week where she did 60 Minutes, which did not go well for her. She did Kimmel, or not Kimmel. She did the other guy. I can never remember his name. Stephen Colbert. She did Colbert. She did The View. And she did Howard Stern. Those are all softball interviews. And then she comes in and she does the interview with Brett Baer. But again, from an astrological standpoint, this would be the time you would do it. You would try to make her look as good as possible because the angles are going to be the best. Now, she's born on that full moon, that Aries full moon, which to me, the Aries, of anything in her chart, the Aries full moon is the aspect where I think she's really trying to ascend to power. Now, Saturn here clearly is poised to be a major force on her midheaven. Her Saturn is retrograde natally. So it's almost as if she gets to the mountaintop and doesn't quite get there. Right? She gets to the mountaintop and just doesn't quite. It's kind of like Hillary Clinton, although Hillary Clinton does not have Saturn conjunct her midheaven. But it's this Aries moon that I feel really drives her and probably makes her a total pain in the ass in a lot of ways. I mean, it's well aspected, don't get me wrong. She's got that Mars moon trine, which, for all intents and purposes is kind of passionate, right? Like I could probably see why somebody like Willie Brown or Montel Williams or who else would want to hang out with her, right? Because whether you like her or not, she has some sizzle here with this Mars moon trine. She has some sizzle. But I feel like it's also alienating in a lot of ways. And it's in the 11th house. So I'm not always sure Kamala gets along well with women, especially with the moon in Aries in the 11th house. I don't think that works. And I've pointed this out before. She seems to do much better with older men. Like older men have been the stepping stone, literally, the stepping stone of her political career. Of course, the first person that she hooks up with is Willie Brown. At least that's the first one we know of. We don't know if she had a relationship with any professors in college. But Willie Brown is the first person that she really kind of hooks up with as a power couple. And then, if you follow her little trail, right, then eventually she winds up with Joe Biden, another older guy. And then in between, she has Doug Emhoff, whatever his name is, the first. What is he? The first vice gentleman or some shit like that, whatever they call him. But he's another older dude, right? So Saturn represents the older men in her life. And being right there next to her midheaven, of course, they played a role. I believe Willie Brown, if I'm not mistaken, is an Aries. So I think in some ways, Willie Brown saw a part of himself in Kamala Harris, or however she says her name. That she was young, probably in his mind, smart, and ambitious. Like, I think those are the three things that Willie Brown saw in Harris: young, smart, and ambitious. And he himself, at one point in time, was young, smart, and ambitious. Willie Brown studied to be a dentist in the Army. Can you believe that? He's an Aries. He wanted to be a dentist. And it's too bad that he didn't take up dentistry in a very serious way. Just think, right? In some parallel timeline, Willie Brown becomes a dentist, and there really is no Kamala Harris. There really isn't. Because there's no Willie Brown to catch her on the other side. The story of San Francisco, the story of California, the story of the United States of America, the story of the world would be entirely different if Willie Brown had just become a fucking dentist. Willie, don't give up. I know it's hard now, but you're going to help so many people. And guess what, Willie? You'll make really good money as a dentist. You get to hire people. You can have dental franchises. What do you think, Will? Come on, hang in there, buddy. No, but it's true. Had he chosen a different life, is really weird. Life is very, very weird. Willie Brown, DDS. There's no Kamala Harris. One time I was, they have these dragons in the Chinatown parade, the Chinese New Year parade. And this dragon was the main dragon. It's like the dragon that, is at the end of the parade. It's the final. And so this parade started down on, I think, Market Street. And then it winds its way all the way up just to the base of Chinatown. And I knew this guy who was, he worked at this florist that I would deliver flowers at occasionally. And it was right around I think it might have been Valentine's Day, because I think Chinese New Year's was just after Valentine's Day. And I'd go there on Valentine's Day and I'd deliver flowers. I got paid pretty well too. So these guys at this florist, they like me. And one of the guys was this Chinese guy, and he was totally gay, and he was a martial arts instructor at a kung fu school in Chinatown. And he was a cool guy, and he said, "Hey, do you want to be a part of the dragon in the Chinatown parade?" And then, we all meet up at the studio afterwards, and we have a couple beers. I said, "Fuck yeah, that sounds great. I'll be a part of that dragon." So I got in. It's like the way that you do it. You dress in black, and there are teams. So there are people that are next to you, and you go in the inside of the dragon, and there are lights. It's like this big giant paper mache dragon and snakes and shit, and so it's like got a wooden rib cage, and it has the wooden crossbar. And you hold on to the wooden crossbar on the inside as you're moving around. And then your partner is walking next to you. And then when you want to tap out, you'll tap out. And then he or she gets in, and you do this all the way to uh, basically like the intersection of, it's like almost where Broadway is in San Francisco. It's like the intersection of Little Italy, North Beach, and Chinatown, right there. So we get to the area, right? We get to the end of the parade, and Willie Brown is there at the end of this parade, and all these firecrackers are going off. Like it's like there's so many firecrackers, it's almost like daylight, right? It's almost like daylight. And I had this Scorpio rising thought in my head. And I'm like, if anybody wanted to off this guy, this would be the perfect fucking place and time, because nobody would figure it out. Nobody would figure it out, right? Like if you were really discreet with all these fireworks going around, and you kind of like, I don't know, did a thing in your coat or something, right? And put a couple of slugs in Willie Brown, nobody would know. Nobody would know unless somebody was standing right next to you, right? Like that thought crossed my mind. It would be a very good scene for a movie. I mean, really, it would work for a movie. Especially if you like kind of had the gun sort of lined up inside the dragon, right? Anyway, so yeah, this is Harris's chart, and she's at her peak right now. She is at her peak. And we talked about Mars last week, right there. You zoom in a little bit. I don't have my normal glasses tonight. I got my Elton Johners on. My Buggles. So Mars is at 22. So it's getting there. It's getting there. By Wednesday, Thursday, the hammer of the gods comes in. Right there. Bang on the moon, bang on the sun. You know what's really interesting about her moon in Aries is many of you have probably followed Candace Owens' really excellent work on unearthing who Kamala Harris is. And this whole idea that her grandmother is this really dark, black Jamaican woman that shows up in her book. Oh, by the way, she has real problems with her book. Her book has been almost completely plagiarized. Her personal story stuff, I think, has been conflated, and a lot of it is fictitious. Let's put it that way. But there are talking points and policy points in her book that she's pulled directly from other sources. Wikipedia, it's not even close. It's verbatim, maybe a word or two has changed, but Peter Boghossian did a piece. I did a YouTube short on it, and I think Christopher Rufo went in and his team just matched up. Like they would grab chunks of text, excuse me, and then they would throw it in the internet in a search, and it would pop up, but it would pop up from other places besides Harris's book. And so they were able to put together essentially the receipts for this plagiarism. And the New York Times has a person on their staff who is a major plagiarist hunter. And he got sent some of this material, and he didn't really expound on it very much. And what he saw, he basically said, well, it could be just happenstance or something like that. And they could have sent him the whole thing. The New York Times could have gotten the whole thing. Or they could have gotten the entire document with all the chunked off sections of plagiarism, but they didn't want that. They just wanted a few examples to send to this person. But I say this person because he's got certain pronouns he goes by. So there's a there, but when you don't have the mainstream media reporting on things, they have found a way to gloss over said truth. Anyway, the reason I'm bringing the moon up also is this idea of the mother, right? And even the grandmother, female figures. And I think it's really interesting that what we're talking about here, this is an old one. This is from October 17th. Let me go back. Give me 1 second. Let me just make a quick adjustment to this. Here we go. Let me get the transits in here, right? Get those transits right. Ah, that's more like it. So now Mars is at 24. So just 3 degrees away. So we're looking at around Wednesday. Now remember, Mars can also bring out the fighting spirit in somebody. So are we going to see Kamala Harris backed into a corner? Is that what we're going to see? Let's bring it back up here. That's what I think. I think we're going to see her backed into a corner. Let me just bring this up. Right here. Okay, so yeah, there's that Aries, and again, clearly there are people who have considerably much darker. I got to watch my use of the word clearly because fucking Kamala Harris uses the word clearly all the time. I can't do that. I can't do that, Peaches. Obviously, how about that? Obviously, there are people with much darker skin tones who have the moon in Aries. Obviously, right? But I also think it's kind of interesting that the person who is spoken of Harris's grandmother is Irish and supposedly white. And if there is a connection to the word quote unquote white, it's probably more Caucasian, being that people are from the Caucasus Mountains. But Aryan is another word that was scooped up by the Germans to suggest their affiliation with kind of a hyperboreal race of people, right? So to some extent, when we think of the sign of Aries, we think of the word Aryan, and we think of all the sort of Aryan peoples of the world, which generally tend to be lighter skinned, right? So it's just one of those things. It's not like, oh, well, because she has an Aries moon, she has a white grandmother. But it's one of those things that gets triggered, and we begin to kind of, if we're astrologically minded, we can make those kinds of connections, or at least play with the idea. And that's been problematic for her. This whole thing with her mother has been problematic. The plagiarism has also been very problematic. But again, who's going to report on it? To this point, she's covered pretty heavily. When I say covered, I'm not talking about covered in the sense that the mainstream media covers her every little step she takes, or covers her in a way where, like, they're covering somebody on a news beat or something like that. No, she's covered in the sense that she's, got protection. She's got the media basically wears flak jackets for Kamala Harris. That's what they do. They wear flak jackets for her. But it'll be interesting with this Mars, which we talked about last week. Will it make her more of a fighter? Will it blow her top? Will she steam her little kettle whistle? We'll find out. Tim Waltz had a bad week. And the things that we had been talking about on the show began to come to fruition with Waltz. And it happened right around this mini eclipse that was at 16, 17 degrees, which is on Waltz's sun. And if you haven't been paying attention, what happened was that somebody by the name of Matthew Metro, which is a kind of an odd name, but Matthew Metro came out and said that Tim Waltz, when he was an exchange student at his high school, the one that Tim Waltz taught at in Minnesota, I think it's called Mankato High or something like that, that Tim Waltz seduced him in the classroom. And the young guy was like 17 years old, and he might have had some inkling that he might have been gay or something. And I guess Waltz had pretty good gaydar, and he was able to pick up on his insecurity and life crisis, and began to comfort him by fondling his genitals after school when this kid was confessing that he was going through a hard time with his parents. And what's interesting about Waltz is that he has not been seen lately. I mean, I think they've really limited his appearances because they don't want somebody barking at him and bringing this up. Even though the mainstream media won't bring it up, they do not want him in a place where there's a public exchange for a couple of reasons. Number one, they don't want people talking about it. Number two, they don't know how Waltz is going to respond to something like that or react to it. And it might be completely, it might be really incredibly disastrous for his campaign if he can't hold his temper or just not lose it. So that'll be interesting for him when this moon moves into Cancer, because he's got a Capricorn moon and that lunar opposition in his chart, and that's not too far away. Here's our moon over here, just gotten into Gemini. So we're about 4 days away, because he's got a late Capricorn moon right around 28 degrees. That'll be interesting. That'll be a very interesting lunar opposition. Again, the same time, that's going to be right around where Mars is. Right. So this Mars is opposing, Waltz is going to be opposing Waltz's natal moon in Capricorn, and also squaring his Jupiter. It's already moved past his sun, but it's going to square his Jupiter. So I think there's heavy weather ahead. We talked about it last week. There's very heavy weather ahead with Tim Waltz. Very, very heavy weather. And I think they've kept him under wraps pretty much for the entire week. So here we go. We are in Scorpio season. And this is when things start to get very dark. I mean, literally up here in the Northern Hemisphere, things start to get really, really dark. We're moving away from the lower half of the chart into the upper half of the chart. Let me do a glimpse here. And some people will say, well, now we're actually moving to the lower half. We're coming from the upper half. Yep, you could. Hold on. No, that's not it. Give me 1 second here. Actually, let me do this. I crank this out. I want them without the transits. Where are we? By the way, I hope everybody's had a relaxing weekend. And that you're all rested and ready to go. There we go. Let's get rid of the transits. There we go, right here. That's what we want. Voila. Okay, let me put this back up here. A little chart refreshment. Here we go. Okay. All right. What do I get for 9 p.m.? Let me see. 8 p.m. Okay. Okay. Here we go. All right. That's what we're looking at here. So when the sun, we're just going to use this as a guide. If we were to put the sun at 28 Libra, it would be right there. 7th house is Libra. So that this means that the sun is now traversing the 8th house of the zodiac. And this is a major, major time for us up here in the Northern Hemisphere on a yearly basis. It's always significant because we're moving away from the comfort zone. Like this is the comfort zone down here. Self, your little toys and goodies that you have, your 3rd house, your family gatherings, your brothers and sisters, the nice little spring festivals in your small town, your farmers markets, some of which tend to go dark during the fall, your home, right? The 5th house, the things that you kind of love to do, the bars that you go to, or the cafes you go to, or the softball teams you play, whatever it is that you love to do, time with your kids, right? The 6th house, oh yeah, putting in a good solid day's worth of work. The sweat of the brow. And then the 7th house, hopefully the lovely and fortunate connection with another, right? But this area really represents in the north the time from spring until fall, right? Spring until fall. And now we're descending. We're descending deeper into the chart. And we're in the 8th, we're getting ready to head in the 8th house. And I talked about this last week. I've always found it really, really weird that we have these elections in November, first Tuesday in November, because the 8th house, it's the underworld. How many instances have you heard of the underworld being involved in American elections? Well, I know one straight off the top of my head, and that was the election of JFK in 1960. He does not get elected unless Meyer Lansky and Sam Giancana and Frank Sinatra all get involved. And they all get involved at the behest of his old man, who really wants his son to be president. And who do they lean on for the votes to get his son over the top? It's the unions. It's the unions, because the Teamsters and the mob controlled the unions. So the underworld, again, a very eighth house element, was involved in the election of JFK. Now, this is a really interesting question that I've never even really thought of or asked myself. That was the assassination of JFK, and I do believe he was assassinated, but was the assassination of JFK in some ways an energetic byproduct of making a deal with the mob? Clearly, it was on a level where the mob was pissed off because JFK had given his word that Bobby would not be pursuing any more racketeering charges against the mob, which is what he'd been doing even before JFK got elected and named him his attorney general. Like, that's how he was making his bones. And he was going after people like Jimmy Hoffa and Gene Khanna and a lot of these mob guys. Like, that's what he was doing. And they said, of course, if we do this, we'll make sure that we get out of your way. And they didn't do that. He kept doing what he was doing. He was like, fuck you. We got our votes. You think you're bigger than the United States government? No, sorry. That's not happening. Right? So clearly it was a backlash because of going back on their deal. But again, when you do a deal like that, it's almost like you're doing a deal with the devil. I mean, really, you're doing a deal with these people are Plutonian. They are Plutonian. They emerge, or they dwell in the underworld. That's what they call the mafia. That's what they call the mob. They call it the underworld. And that's what the eighth house is. So, of course, 3 years later, 3 years and 11 months later, he winds up getting rubbed out by a number of people who did not like what he was doing. So there is the reneging on a deal, right? I mean, even if you look at astrology, the deal takes place in the seventh house. Okay, you're going to do this, and you're going to do this, and we're going to do this, we're going to do this. Handshake, handshake, good, let's go. But once he gets elected, he goes back into that eighth house, and they're fighting crime against the forces of the underworld. So that's one election clearly where the mob was involved. I'll give you another election where I think the mob was involved. I believe it was the election of Harry S. Truman. And we all know the picture of Truman with the newspaper. And I believe he was running against Thomas Dewey. And Thomas Dewey was ahead in the poll. He was ahead in the election going into the night. Like, how many times have we seen this scenario? What happened with Truman? He's got that famous newspaper article, Dewey wins. Of course, Truman wins. And if you look into Truman, he's another guy that is big time connected. He's a Freemason. He's also really tight with people from B'nai B'rith, which is a Jewish branch of Freemasonry. He comes from the realm of being a haberdasher and was part of the haberdasher community in, I believe, Omaha, which is where he's from. So let's take a look at Truman. I'm just doing this because I want to make sure. I always get Omaha and Kansas City mixed up. He's Kansas City, my bad. I just had to. You know what's interesting about Truman is that he's the 33rd president of the United States. The 33rd president of the United States. And he's also a 33rd degree Mason. I always found that to be interesting. Here, let me do this. I'll show you his page. Right there. So there he is, born May 8th, and he's from Kansas City, Missouri. Was raised in Independence. Yeah, he fought in World War I. Let me see if there's a picture of him and the Dewey headline. What's his wife look like, Bess? Well, she doesn't look too bad. Some of these women just look like men. Let's see, where's the famous newspaper? There he is with Stalin and Churchill. Oh, yeah, he's the bomb dropper as well. That's right, yes. Let me see. Let's keep going. I guess we don't get the... oh, there it is. This is the famous headline right here. Truman was so widely expected to lose the 1948 election that the Chicago Tribune had printed papers with this erroneous headline when few returns were in. Oh, he was happy about that, wasn't he? Happy as a clam. So this is another election that probably had what we would call election interference in it. Although, sure looks like it's a big trounce there, huh? What other elections have had election interference or the mark of the underworld? Plenty, I'm sure. But that's what happens when we go into the 8th house. We're dealing with these forces that are dark, verboten, the taboo. So now all bets are off, right? Like if it's a little late in the season for October surprise, but once the sun goes in here into the 8th house, all bets are off. Darkness, chicanery. And the 8th house always changes. It just depends on where the rising sign is. But for 30 days, we're really in the underworld. And of course, it's marked by one of the most famous non-religious holidays. Oh, I guess maybe if you're a Satanist, it's religious. Halloween, right? Halloween is really where Samhain or whatever calendrical marker you want to use. It is that those are the days that remind us that we are being taken into the underworld. And really, we're here not just for 1 month. We're here for the next 6 months. So the idea is that we're not going to see the sun again, really, for another 6 months. We won't see it until April. And it's always a very interesting time when we're in this part of the zodiac. And our friend Mario had a really great presentation at the event last week. And he really got into this whole idea of the North and the pole star. And he got into this very elaborate symbolic reference between the pole star and Libra, and how there's always this middle part of Libra which is usually the center of the scales. And he made all these different connections with the center of the scales to a ladder, to even a stairway, right? A stairway to heaven, meaning the journey to the North Star. And everything else on either side of it was sort of the balance of the polarity between a solar kind of based philosophy and a solar based cosmology, and then a lunar based cosmology on the other side. And these are the poles of the masculine and feminine, but down the center, this polar axis, like the axis mundi, right? I mean, you can kind of see it here in some ways. Right? This would be the equivalent of this kind of polar center, even though it's a little off center here, but the polar center to the first house and the seventh house, and literally balancing those two, right? So it's interesting in that regard because it mirrors a journey for us going to the north in the northern hemisphere. So what I mean by that is that theoretically it's supposed to get colder, it's supposed to get more winter-like and more north-like, as the sun progresses through these phases. And even when we get into, the 10th house, when the sun is in Aquarius, we're in the 11th house, and it's still cold. In fact, February might be the coldest month of the year in some ways. And clearly, here's that word clearly again, Uranus in Aquarius as a planet and as a sign represent coldness. Your Aquarius is Aquarius is friendly, but it's not warm and fuzzy. Like, it's friendly to everybody, but it's not always warm and fuzzy. So it could be a very chilly sign. And then when we get into Pisces, when the sun makes that journey from here to here, those are essentially two water gates. The 8th house and the 12th house are these water gates, and they're like portals. And then they shoot us out into this like next round of the seasons. And I know that when we're here in the 7th house, we're still in this place of we're still dealing with the equilibrium of the day and the night forces. And we've gone through the autumnal equinox. And that's going to be like theoretically right in 0 Libra, but it's not always at 0 Libra. So when we move from the 7th house to the 8th house, it is like a portal, because we're also dealing with water. It is a water gate. And then what it does is it shoots us out to the top of the chart, which is the northern part of the chart. And then we hit that 12th house, which is again another water gate, and it shoots us into the first quadrant of the chart, the first 3 houses, right? And then we hit that 4th house, and yes, another water gate, and literally we are thrust into the next 3 areas of the chart. So those houses are really important. And it's interesting because I was watching, I wasn't really watching, I was on a message board, and somebody brought up this idea of how when you look at Stargate Atlantis, you guys are familiar with that, right? Stargate Atlantis. And when you step through Stargate Atlantis, you step through that portal, it's like water. There's a water, kind of watery aspect to that portal. And then of course you can jump through into another world as a result of that. And I remember, I was talking with Mr. Cruz today about this. I remember when I had this incredible dream where I literally tapped into another life that I was living. And how I did it was I stepped through. It was like a wall, but it was made of this plasma. But the plasma was running in a direction. It wasn't static plasma. It was running like a current, and it reminded me of water. And when I stepped through, I knew exactly this other life that I was living. It was pretty obvious. Like, wow, look at this. You know, I'm experiencing something that's very unusual here, and I know everything about whoever it is I am on this side. And then eventually I step back through. So this idea of portals being connected to water, I think is also very much connected to the three water houses, the 12th house, the 4th house, and the 8th house, because as we go through them, it's almost like we're going through a portal, or we're going through a gateway of sorts. Even when we look at what they represent just from a chart standpoint. So the 4th house is your home. It's where you grow up. It's all the things that you become accustomed to. You have traditions, and you know all the kind of emotional values that you absorb come from the 4th house. And then what do? Then you shoot out, then you go to the 5th house. I mean, literally, you shoot out and you go to the 5th house. And what is the 5th house? Well, it's fun, play, romance. It's where you fall in love. It's where you find things that, you know, theoretically you enjoy doing. Sometimes you get in trouble when you go into the 5th house. Maybe you have too much fun, right? But it's literally shooting you out to these next 3 parts of the chart, right? This is the next, you know, we can play with this as a quadrant in the chart. And then when we go through the 8th house, well, what do we deal with there? Well, we deal with the underworld. We deal with taboo. We deal with sexuality. You know, we deal with, at times, like very dark forces in the 8th house. And they can really shape a person in ways that are pretty powerful and pretty profound. I remember when I was working at this job in San Bruno, and I was the assistant recreation director at this apartment complex for singles. They actually used to have these things, and we would put together all these activities for the people at the. They don't do that shit anymore, right? But it was like a selling point. Oh yeah, we have a clubhouse, and we have pool, we have ping pong, we've got a jacuzzi in the bottom, we've got a room where, you know, guests get together, tenants get together, and they watch TV, and you know, we have an activities director. And I mean, they used to do all this shit, right? So I was the assistant director, and I can tell you during that time that I went through some 8th house shit. Looking back on this now, I really went through some 8th house stuff. Like there are things that happened to me in that job that are like a 19-year-old guy would probably want to happen to them. But there was always, it wasn't just like, there was a sense of darkness at times, right? There was very much a sense of darkness with this place. And just looking at it and looking at sort of the activity that I went through there, and I eventually got fired from that job. But that's where I met probably my first and most meaningful spiritual teacher, which was this old guy by the name of Dwayne. And he, as I've said before on the show, he would give me all these things to read, and I felt like I was being initiated into something. And eventually he gives me this one book, which really changed my life in a very big way. And but I had to really go through that darkness to come out the other side and have a kind of an awakening, or a series of grand epiphanies, a revelation. But it wasn't just me having the revelation. It was almost as if the the hand of God was raising me up, right? It's weird because when I think about it, it feels in some ways kind of like the Sabbatean model. Like there's something Sabbatean about what I went through, because I went through that eighth house and I got shot through it like a portal. And it wasn't great. I mean, it was great in some ways, but really it was not so great in other ways. And then I came out of it with this sense of being reborn. And here I am, and and this has nothing to do with anything planetary. Although I'm sure if I went back in time, I could find some interesting eighth house trends that I was going through. It was just a stage of development in my life. Like I think all people kind of get to this interesting stage of development in their life. So that's what happened. And then I came out of it with a sense of, greater sense of like awe and profound thanks for, the grace that I was experiencing in my life. And I really began to learn a lot about this idea and concept of the higher mind. And Jesus alludes to this in the Bible, where he says, I must retreat to the upper room where I can be one with my Father. And what he's talking about is well, I'm going to go up there and I'm going to meditate and I'm going to connect with my Father, which is the Father of all things, Spirit of creation, right? But he's also talking about this concept of the everyday mind, which we use to navigate order lattes, write bills, schedule, right? That's the everyday mind. But there's another part of our mind, which is the higher mind, which allows us to experience higher consciousness. But that's what the higher mind allows us to do. An expanded kind of view of the universe. And it allows us to connect dots in a way that is expansive. And now we're entering into the realm of like cosmologies and wisdom, right? The ninth house is associated with Sagittarius and wisdom. And so I went through that. I actually went through that process. And I remember exactly when it really clicked in. And it clicked in when I took this test on the romantic period, and it all came together. Like everything came together. Like Blake was the creator god of the romantic period, and Keats is the fulfillment of Blake's idea of innocence, experience, and imagination. And in between, you get Coleridge, Bryce, and Shelley, which are all about experience. And then Wordsworth, if you throw Wordsworth into the batch, he's innocence. That's what Wordsworth is all about. He likes to dream about what it was like to be a kid and young and unfettered by the heaviness of the world, right? That's Wordsworth. He's very escapist in a lot of ways. So Blake is the one he's the master of the romantic cosmology, even though he didn't really set out to be that. But that's how I saw it, right? That was a very ninth house kind of higher mind dot connection. And none of that happens unless I go through this eighth house and, go through like a lot of really weird shit, like really weird taboo stuff, and not really liking myself at a certain point along the way. And then we get to that 12th house. And that 12th house is another Watergate. It's another portal. And for people that have Saturn going through their 12th house, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You're going through it. Doesn't happen fast, but you're going through it. It's not like you're shooting the arrows. But that doesn't even mean that you have to have Saturn going through the 8th house. I mean, we can experience these things seasonally. So the 12th house is all about rebirth and this idea that, we come back into the first house and we have this sense of self and direction and feeling like, oh, yeah, I'm reborn. I've come through the baptismal waters of the 12th house. Again, another portal, and you're shot through it. And as you go through this one, this is a very interesting, because sometimes with the 8th house, you can have fun. Like it can be kind of dark. Like the 8th house, like sex, right? Some drugs, some sex match, whatever. Like you can get into that area, but it also can get very heavy and very dark in there. But you can experience that. It's like the 8th house is like the devil's playground in a lot of ways. The 12th house is not like that, right? You don't get that in the 8th house, 12th house. What you get in the 12th house is you get the kind of the resonant fear that can come to you in the 8th house, but you're too busy kind of self-imploding, right, with the 8th house. You get to a point in the 8th house where you'll get there, right? You'll have that moment, you'll have that kind of flash, right? Where you see your life before your eyes and you're like, I got to do something. It's very extreme, right? It is there's no middle ground here, right? The 12th house isn't quite like that. The 12th house is more of a leisurely, I don't know, flotilla down the river Styx or something like that, right? That's because you're dealing with a lot of ghosts with the 12th house, like the ghosts of your life that you've experienced prior to having the 12th house moment, right? So we go through these times in our lives, and many times they'll be highlighted by a major transit, but it's not always the case, right? Like when I was going through that 8th house stuff, I think it was around 20, 21 years old. And so I was going through some Saturn squares, right? I think it's like the second Saturn square. But at the top of my head, it's like, I can't really think of anything from a transit standpoint that was saying, it's just where I was in my life at that time. And there are moments where you will have a 12th house experience, even if you are not having a 12th house transit. Now, wrap your head around that for a second. And then, well, when is this going to happen? When is this going to happen? When is this going to happen? Well, it'll happen when you are feeling like everything around you is kind of old and dead, and you're dealing with things like ghosts and wraiths. Saturn transits in the 12th house will bring it up. It'll rattle the bones, right? It'll rattle the bones. It feels like to me that the 12th house portal, or the 12th house, we'll call it the water gate, is one that's fraught with feeling infinitely alone. You won't feel alone in the 8th house. You could have some very interesting connections. They don't last forever, and there may even be some dire circumstances, but you don't really feel alone here. You certainly don't feel alone in the 4th house. You're there with your family. Although if you grew up in a fucked up family, you can feel very alone. But generally, by and large, you're not alone. The 12th house is where you feel alone. The 12th house of all the houses is the most existential house. It's the one where you don't know if you're going to make it, right? So we're here now. That's where we are now. We're in this place, right? Think of where we are in the north, and particularly in the United States. We are now in the 8th house. We're 2 days away, but we're in the 8th house. So what we're going through right now is an initiation. This is what we're going through. And of course, we're going to be dealing with the underworld. No doubt. No doubt we'll be dealing with the underworld. Dirty-handed, underhanded. The difference between this time and other times is that this is the apotheosis of all those other times. What I mean by that is that if you put all of those other election cycles together in the US, and you put them all together with fraught with their, their own version of corruption or their own version of working the system with people that invariably will want some return on their service or investment as a result of that, right? Everything that's gone before this time is here and present with this time now. And if you look at the last election in 2020, the last national election, my God, how much trauma, right? Like, how much trauma do people still have over that? Like, I'll be honest, I was traumatized by that election. I was fucking traumatized. It took me months to get over that election. I didn't start to really get my feet back on the ground until about March or April. January, I really struggled to have anything. Oh, I could have said a lot, right? I could have said a lot. I really struggled to have anything meaningful to say. It's like, fuck, I've got to get on here because I think people just, need to talk about this shit. And there was, and then there was the wild goose chase of chasing the votes. The whole thing, when I look back on it now, it just seems so fucking traumatizing. Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell. My God. Lynn Wood. Where are these people now? Where is Sidney Powell now? Where is Lynn? Like, they just kind of crawled back into the woodworks, right? And the whole thing was incredibly traumatized. Well, here we are again. We're reliving our trauma. Isn't that great? Oh, it'll be different this time. It'll be different this time. Well, it may be different, but it may be the same. So here we go. We're going into just thinking about that. Just thinking about that brings up 8th house vibes. It's like, oh shit. Here we go again. And I think for some people who are like canaries in a coal mine, there are people out there who are wigging out right now. Really wigging out because they're feeling the instability in the air pressure. And I feel like we're going to see a lot more people lose their shit. And not, next month, the coming days, the coming weeks, we're going to see people lose their shit because the pressure is going to get incredibly high. And people, like, we always get this message, well, this is the most important election ever. No, this is really the most important election ever. It really is. Because we know what'll happen if Harris wins. It is going to be ugly. Think of this. You got to remember this. She may be smiles and Miss Positivity and let's party and turn the page. That woman is an absolute narcissist. She might be more of a narcissist than Donald Trump. Wrap your head around that. She is a complete and utter narcissist. Not only that, but she's also more than likely a borderline personality. Anytime she whips out a new accent, right, she's in Borderlineville. And she's probably borderline sociopathic. I mean, not even borderline. So we've got a borderline personality, a heavy-duty narcissist, and a sociopath. And she's playing nice now. But if that woman wins, and again, last week we looked at the astrology, it looks like Trump, right? It looks like Trump. The astrology, I would say 80-20 favors Trump. And there are other astrologers who will tell you different. 80-20 favors Trump. You look at some of the polls right now, like Trump is hitting those polls pretty hard. So all those things point to a Trump victory. But we know that we're dealing with people who don't play fair. And Kamala Harris has been dragged through the mud during this election cycle. Dragged through the mud. Do you think that when it's all said and done, if she gets elected, or manipulate the exercise is manipulated? I have to watch my language here on YouTube, you know. The exercise is manipulated. Do you think that she's just going to be so happy and she's going to be the great uniter? Oh, no, 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 no. No. She will be on people, this is really interesting, right? This is what the left does all the time. The left will always project what they're going to do. They always project Donald Trump is going to, he's going to extradite people. He's going to put people in camps. He's going to do all, it's like, whoa, really? Really? We know how this inversion works. Oh, you're telling us what you're going to do. Kamala Harris, I'm telling you right now, she can't wait to become president so that she's the one that can exact revenge upon the people who made her look bad. That's a person who cannot stand looking bad. She's a very, very fragile personality. She is absolutely cunning and unafraid to do what it takes to get to the next level, which we've seen. There's also something weirdly fetishistic about her. She also kind of matches up in a weird way with this, kind of Black Madonna complex that seems to have become very prevalent over the last 10 years, right? You think of Lizzo, you think of, these people inside of the media that kind of represent this idea of this Black Madonna, right? She, even though she's not that, she's been sort of moved into that zip code. She will make life a living hell for people, especially the people who dissed her, who crossed her, who were mean to her. And I can just see it. I can get between those walls with her and Doug, and she's like hitting on her second bottle of Pinot Noir, right? And she's, just pacing around the living room. I'm gonna get these motherfuckers. Doug, you have the list. You have the list, Doug. Who's on the list? Who's on? Right? I can just see her doing that. It's interesting because in most presidential elections, the candidate who is taller generally wins. Not all the time, but generally the tall candidate wins. I think it's called the Harding effect or something like that. And Harris is short, but she's a woman, but she's also really short. And I don't think we've ever asked ourselves, is a woman capable of having a Napoleon complex because they're short? Maybe. I mean, what is she, about 5'2", 5'3", something like that. I'm telling you, man, if she wins, she's going to make life a living hell for people, especially the people that crossed her or she feels were impudent or were not nice. So this is where we are. We're having to deal with all this stuff. Right? We're in this kind of scorpionic world. Oh, by the way, there's this new document that gives the Department of Defense the right to fire on civilians. Oh, did you read that? Has that crossed your screen? I'm not even going to look it up because it's there. You say, well, we need a link. We need something. It's out there. A lot of you have seen it. You know about it. That just got passed. Think about that for a moment now. The Department of Defense can fire on American citizens. And there are all these conditions, of course. Well, it has to meet all these conditions. If it doesn't meet all these conditions, well, you can't pull the trigger. Well, who's to determine what those conditions? We know what they are, but who's okay? Have they met that criterion, that criterion? That, okay, go ahead, load them up. Let's go. Why do you think they're doing that? Why now? Oh, we're in Scorpio season. Gee, that's why. Like it's dredging things up. Dredging things up. Again, the 12th house would give you, the 12th house is just more kind of existential and you're just alone, right? You're just alone. But the 8th house will dredge up your fears. You get some fear in the 12th house, but it's different. It's more kind of existential and eternal, right? Because the 12th house takes you out of the chart and you ain't coming back, and who knows what happens after that. But the 8th house, oh, now you're dealing with like life and death, and you're dealing with, well, that's a taboo, isn't it? I mean, for I don't know, for as long as I've been around, and even longer than that. I mean, they did it at Kent State, but there was hell to pay, when they did that. And clear again, there's that word clearly. I can't use that word anymore. Historically, there have also been people that have been shot by the government. Randy Weaver, Ruby Ridge comes to mind. David Koresh, and the people in Waco, Texas, the Branch Davidians. So we have lots of historical experiences where, yeah, it's happened. But I don't think one that was really terrible, and I'm wondering if Harry Truman might have even been involved in this. This was when Herbert Hoover was president, and there were a number of soldiers from World War I who were promised a number of things for fighting in that war, including like back pay. And it wasn't like they were expecting what people might expect now. No, this was like really basic fundamental things that the government had said they were going to give them when they came home from the war. They never got it. They never got what they were promised. It could have been, I don't know, some sort of money or payout or a GI loan. I don't know. I don't know exactly what these were guys that fought in World War I. And so what they did is they occupied Washington, D.C. They occupied D.C. They had these little shanty towns that they had set up, and they weren't going to leave until Herbert Hoover gave them what they had been told that they were going to receive. And what did he do? He got all these guys who would become major generals in World War II to go in and clean them up. And that meant even shooting and firing on them. And there's a famous story where there was a guy who had saved Patton, who was a tank commander in World War I. And he had saved Patton. And he was one of these guys that was there protesting. And Patton had to physically remove him from this little encampment And they were using things like their version of bulldozers or whatever. And it pained Patton terribly to do that. So there's an instance where the military fired on civilians to clear them out. They didn't want them there anymore. So it's not like it hasn't happened historically. It has, but who knows? Who knows what they're anticipating as a result of what's coming? It really feels like we have a few more weeks of normalcy. I mean, it really feels like there's going to be a before and after moment with this election. Like, remember where we are now and who we are. Because after November 5th, this is going to be a different world. No matter what happens, it'll be a different world. And it was a different world with Biden, but Trump was always there in the periphery, right? He was always there in the periphery in whatever kind of game they were playing to change the vote. Like, that was going on after the election. And then Trump kind of goes dark, and then he pops up and he goes on his COVID victory tour. So he was always there, and people always knew that he was going to run. So he was always in the background. So Trump is an anchor from 2016 through 2020 and even up to now, right? So even though things are quite different under Biden, and we're different under Biden, and we have all these nice new people that are living with us now, Trump, in a weird way, was a constant that connected us to this particular timeline. And no matter what happens on November 5th, it is the end of Trump. He will not run again. If somehow this thing is vigorously massaged in Harris's direction, there's a good chance that Harris will wind up winning not just one, but 2 elections. So it would be like, well, why even vote at this point? And so when I say that this will be the last election, it'll be the last election between 2 people that are running the semblance of a race. It's kind of like nobody ever challenges Nancy Pelosi, because nobody can ever win against Nancy Pelosi. The way that everything has been set up in terms of the districting and her people that she represents are all going to vote for her because they're in her demographic. When I say demographic, we're talking San Francisco, liberal, now far left corporate politics. So that's really the demographic. But then there are also what I would call lowercase liberals. Like, she's a liberal, she's a corporate liberal with a capital CL. And there are liberals with a lowercase l, and they will vote for her just because they're in her. So no, you cannot be a Republican or conservative in Nancy Pelosi's district and win. You just can't. And even whoever winds up taking over for Pelosi, if she ever resigns or kicks the bucket or whatever, it'll more than likely be the same, right? You get Kamala Harris in for 4 years, or you get her in, and it'll be like she's the version of Pelosi for the next 8 years. Because what will happen is that they will make sure that any conservative voice will not be heard or will be muffled. And there's also a very, very, very strong chance that the conservative movement will be turned into a political witch hunt. Keep in mind, this is a woman who has a vendetta. She does not like being shown up. And I can tell you, in private, she's seething. And she can't wait to get in charge and become in charge. So this is what we're really up against here. And that's why I say this is the last election. If Trump wins, I feel like the country will become a very different country. And, in the spirit of Uranus and Gemini, which is nigh upon us, or close to being upon us. Nigh means not almost here. I feel like we're going to become more balkanized. Like, it's probably going to happen anyway, but under Trump, it feels much more tangible, right? Because there are going to be states, that are still going to be deep in the blue, and they're not going to want to participate in a union that is headed by Donald Trump. I guarantee you that we've got Jupiter and Gemini. Look, right now I'm talking about this, and the moon is in Gemini, and Jupiter's in Gemini. And when we think of balkanization, when we think of splitting up the party, I mean, it's a very Gemini sort of model or paradigm, and it goes into the last eclipses that we had, the eclipse of 2017 and the eclipse of 2024. These two great American eclipses, and then the other one that we had in October of last year, 2023, which creates the Aleph. But the two that are the ones that are at the top of the hit parade, 2017 and 2024, basically turns the country into four quarters. And we saw in 2017 that the country became divided. It became divided almost along like the Mason-Dixon line. Not quite, but close. And now the country has become quartered. You have people on the left that are not into Harris, right? So you have a bit of a split in the left, and you have a bit of a split in the right as well. There are people inside the right, or the Patriot movement, or the Freedom movement. They're all for Trump, but they're not all for Israel. That's not a, and then you have people inside that group who are all for Trump, and they're all for Israel. So that's kind of a split. And you can even see some of that on the left liberal side of things. Although I would say that the left is probably less pro-Israel or than the so-called right. But you'll still see that fissure in the left. Some of it will be around Israel, but the fissure in the left will be more along the lines of they're just, you pay attention. There are people who are fleeing the Democratic Party. They don't want Kamala Harris. The one constant that they've always been able to count on have been black men and black women, and they're out. They're moving out. Like, hello, headline. Our friends in the so-called black community are waking up. They are waking up, and a lot of them have kind of moved in the Trump direction. So again, that represents kind of a split and a fissure inside of that political group. So we can even see that on the left, there's this kind of, fracturing that's taking place. And on the right, there's a fracturing taking place as well. Because they may be, like I said, they may be into Trump, but they're not into Israel or AIPAC. So this is really the effect in a lot of ways of the two eclipses from 2017 and 2024. And Uranus comes into Gemini, and holy smokes, are we looking at a very different, kind of world? What's interesting is that the last time Uranus was in Gemini, you know who that affected the most? It affected Europe the most. Europe got carved up on the back end of Uranus and Gemini. Like, oh, look, all these countries now belong to the Soviet Union. Hey, look at that. Let's put a wall. Let's put a wall in Berlin, and everything east of Berlin on the other side of the wall belongs to the Soviet Union. Like, Europe got fucking carved up. All these countries just kind of went away. and they literally went underwater, and the weight of the USSR. You know, the United States didn't go through that. The United States went through a major uptick in industrialization. It took Europe a while to get reindustrialized, but yeah, Uranus and Gemini sliced and diced Europe. So we can see this with Uranus and Gemini, and that was where the war theater was. The war theater isn't so much in Europe now, but the war theater is really much more here in this country. And when we talk about fifth generation warfare, that's really what we're talking about: asymmetric warfare, fifth generation warfare. So, and we've been going through it for a long time. It's not news to anyone. So here we are. We're in this eighth house, and a lot of these fears are starting to come up. And again, it's only been 4 years, but fucking 2020 was trauma. It was traumatic. So how do you think people are going to react when this thing goes sideways? Because it's going to go sideways. Either way, it's going to go sideways. It's a very interesting, very, very interesting time we're in. Like you're all witnessing history, whether it's history you like or history you don't like. You're witnessing history. And this election and this election season and this eighth house moment that we're going through is unlike any other. I think when I look back on 2020, it just seems like it was just yesterday and these years have gone by. When I look back on 2020, even though I saw Trump and all these rallies that were, making Joe Biden's rallies just, look like somebody was running for city council, I didn't feel comfortable, right? I did not feel comfortable. It was like, what are these people doing? I mean, this guy is a fucking potato. They're not just throwing in the towel here. Like, I was uncomfortable. I wasn't like, and there were times it was weird. There were times during Trump's rallies where I almost felt like he was doing a farewell tour or something. It was weird. It had all those, YMCA moments. They all had a weird vibe. Of course, there was kind of the revival feeling that went along with it, but it's had a weird vibe. And this time it's a very different dynamic, and it's a very different vibe. Like this feels in some ways more like the Hillary Clinton election, but different as well. I mean, I feel like Trump has finally found his electoral stride over the past, I'd say, month. Like you can tell that he's gotten stronger in some ways. And the rallies also feel very different than the disco rallies of 2020. They just feel different. But here we are. Here we are. Welcome to the darkness. We are in the eighth house, and it can get real fucking spooky. Real spooky. And I think if we, just take a moment to remember what it was like in 2020 and the aftermath of that and the trauma that ensued, that's all there still. So we have to face that, right? This is the whole thing with the eighth house. So we have to face that. We have to face the sense that there may be things that are just completely out of our control. Completely out of our control. You can do your best. You can go out. You can vote. Hell, you can block walk, whatever, right? Like there's a certain point in time where none of that is going to matter. None of it will matter. And you're just going to have to let go. And whatever result happens will be a part of this process. But we're all going through it, right? We're all going through this sense of, okay, where the fuck is this thing going to take us? Now, ultimately, I think it will wind up in our favor. When I say us, I would include freedom thinking, multidimensional, truth loving individuals who have found some degree of traction with our spiritual beliefs in the political world. That's who I'm referring to. And I've talked about this before. Like when I was younger, I didn't really care about, I followed politics. I didn't really care about politics. Politics was dominated by people that were much older than I was. And these were people that had been through like fucking World War II and shit like that, right? Like these were the voices that you heard on TV, or these, whether it was some Sunday morning political talking point show, these were people from a different generation, and they had a different vocabulary, and they stood for a very different kind of America. And it wasn't a bad version of it, or wasn't a good version of it. It just was a version that I couldn't relate to because that was not my period of time. I also really was not a baby boomer, not quite Gen X. So I grew up as this outsider. That was my thing. It wasn't like, oh yeah, Republicans are great, and they're gonna keep my taxes low. I get to keep more of my money, and we'll have a good defense budget, and we'll make sure that we don't spend a ton on these social welfare programs. And that's really what the Republican Party was about for a long period of time. If they did that, then you were happy. If your taxes were reasonable and they weren't breaking out any new absurd kind of public programs on their watch, and you maintained a pretty strong military, that was it, right? That was all they really needed to do in order to assuage people that everything was okay in America, and that if you were a Republican, then they were doing their job. And, that was okay, but it wasn't really all that interesting, to be honest with you. And it wasn't until really, I wouldn't say Trump. For me, the real political awakening in my life came during the Gulf War. And when that happened, I was 30 years old, and I really started to look behind the scenes at who was pulling the levers of power. And that was my descent into the realm of the occult and the esoteric and secret societies and lodges. So my political awakening was also sort of a dark spiritual awakening in some ways. And it ultimately, I think all of us, or a lot of us who didn't give two shits about politics, we've gotten sucked into this thing now, because we've gotten to this point where we understand that our lives in a lot of ways depend on, or the quality of our lives depend on, what happens next. And we have seen incredibly aggressive overtures from, if you want to call them communists, or sort of postmodern, corporate communists, whatever you want to call it, right? This thing that we've seen that's been really shoved down our throat. vis-a-vis race, identity, and gender. Like, it's woken a lot of people up. And I think as a society and a culture, we've been really fair and we've been really liberal. Like, again, if you knew somebody who was gay and they worked at your office, you didn't make a big fucking deal out of it, right? Or you had a gay family member or whatever. You didn't make a big deal out of it. It just was what it was. And people went about their business. And all of a sudden it became a battering ram in our society. Like, this whole idea of race, identity, gender identity, sex, right? It just became a battering ram. And so that's part of why people have woken up politically. Like, you don't want to give your children over to world-class pedophiles, because for all intents and purposes, that's where all this is going. Hello, we're back in the 8th house again. That brings up some interesting fears, doesn't it? Like, what happens if these people get in and they wind up normalizing the type of behavior that has been brazenly on display for the past 8 years, roughly? Yeah, it's not good. It's not good. The social engineering that's gone into having people even remotely consider this idea that, well, maybe identity and gender is fluid and I can flip my kids my plumbing, the age 9 or 10, and because they just don't feel like they're a boy or a girl. Right? We've seen this, right? We've seen the normalization of this. And the whole idea is to ultimately normalize sexual relations with young people. Right? This is where, again, like, this is the thing that has woken people up. Like, pedophilia, trafficking, the stuff going on with children. Like, that's been part of the political awakening. This stuff wasn't talked about in the 80s when Reagan was elected. Yeah, it was in the background. Some people knew about this shit, but it was in the background. It wasn't clearly in the foreground. This is in the foreground. Like, this is in the world that we're engaged in now. And again, this is all 8th house stuff, right? It is the taboo. We are really in that scorpionic world. It's kind of like, if you really looked at it through that very dark lens, you may not even want to get up in the morning because of everything that has been kind of put on schedule, right? It's all kind of on schedule. Gangs of millions and millions and millions of young fighting age men, right? Taking over apartment buildings. And then you've got this whole weird kind of sex and gender fluid thing going on, right? Like, hey, oh, you think you're a parent? No, you're not a parent. Your children don't even belong to you. Well, who do they belong to? Well, they belong to the universe, or they belong to the state. They can do whatever they want. They can make up their own minds. Again, 8th house material. You want to talk about the economy? That's also 8th house material. Where's my money? Oh, my money's in a bank. Do I have access to it? Are there going to be bail-ins? I mean, these are all things that, again, people are starting to get a little concerned about. This is all 8th house material. And I feel like the way to navigate this is just like, it's like you're walking through the valley of the shadow of death. And you just have to not flinch. Not flinch. So it'd be great if we could just all have a collective freak out and get it over with. Right? Just have a collective freak out, get it all over with, and that after that, we're good. We're good. We can handle whatever's coming. Right? or have a collective near-death experience. That would be an interesting one too, where we really come to the edge of our collective mortality, and then we either go through the other side or we walk back from it. Wow, we don't really want to do that again, do we? Maybe we should start treating each other better. Maybe we need to, stay within a certain sort of boundary when it comes to our social actions and respect for one another, right? And then and it's not just the people who are the ones that are conscious aware of it, but the ones who have been acting out like petulant children. Maybe they come to the same conclusion. But that's where we are. We're headed in, right? It's Scorpio season, and we're headed into the 8th house. And this is where we face our fears. And I do think that there is a high degree of fear and tension that's been built up around this election. Now, if Trump smashes Harris, really smashes Harris, one of the things that I've talked about is these ghost votes that will look like some form of interference on the Trump campaign's part. That's one scenario. And then the burden of proof for them, the Trump campaign, is to then show them they had no connection. So this can get really ugly really, really fast. But if he smashes Harris and comes in and winds up being in the White House again, this is not the end of anything. They are lined up and they're ready to go full on lawfare again. This is really the unfortunate part of where we are. Just because Trump wins, if he wins, that's going to be, again, we're in a deep state of conflict, and they've been propping up the economy so that it's not completely in shambles, and that Joe Biden can get real. Do you think they're going to do that again with Trump in office? Probably not. So we're still not in the clear at all, right? We're not. We're in a, like, this country will never be the same again. Never. And I think that the best thing that any of us can do, would be to be a bit fluid here and try to be a bit flexible, a bit mutable as these results come through. Hey, whatever happens is going to happen, right? Whatever happens is going to happen. And it's all about how ultimately we respond to it. All right. I don't think I have a lot more tonight. I almost didn't go live because I wasn't sure if I really had anything to say, except for the fact that we're in this very deep, dark season right now. And, it's kind of like when you were a kid and your parents put you to bed and they turn out the lights. It feels like it's and a lot of people haven't really evolved from that. A lot of people are still that little kid in the room, not wanting the lights to go off, not wanting mom and dad to leave the room, to be in that, big black room all by themselves. A lot of people haven't moved away from that. So we'll find out what we're made of, won't we, over the course of the next few weeks. In the meantime, stiff upper lip, as they say. Shoulders back, chest extended. Hold your head up high. Have some dignity and some self-respect, and you'll be just fine. All right. Thanks for being here, and thanks for supporting the show. You can always get an astrological reading from yours truly I enjoy it. It's my work. And those links are inside the show notes. Also, you can sign up for locals over there as well. If you feel like you want to buy me a cup of coffee, that link is in there as well. And we're going to come out the other side, whatever that other side is. Be ready. Robert Phoenix signing off. Use your head in order to discern what's real, your heart to set what's possible, and treat each other well. Bye for now.